Hello everyone and welcome to the iSpring Solutions webinar. Thank you very much for joining us today as we are going to be speaking about how to ensure efficacy, viability, and accessibility of your content. Thanks to all of you who joined us for the first time, and thanks to all of you who have been through the whole webinar series, starting with the first episode. And I would like to remind that this is our 8th episode. So that means that we are almost done with the webinar series, which is exciting and sad at the same time. So I'm not sure if I mentioned, but my name is Paulina. I am a community manager, and I will be the moderator for today's webinar. And as a speaker, we have Michael Shiashi. Hi, Michael. How are you doing?
Hey, Paulina. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me today.
Michael is a technologist at Alternative Media, and he will be discovering this topic for you today, guys. And I have also invited our senior support technical engineer, Alex Dim. Hi, Alex. What's up?
Hello. I'm doing great today. How are you?
I'm good, thanks for asking. Alex will be helping out with your question, guys, in the question box. So if you have any, please be sure to submit them in the question box, which should be on the right side of your GoToWebinar panel. And also, as always, we're going to have Q&A session at the very end of the webinar after Michael is done with his presentation. And I also wanted to remind you that we are providing a special bonus at the end of our webinar series. If you would like to share what you've learned during this webinar, you just need to send this message. Leave this comment under our main blog post. And at the end of the webinar series, we'll just get your friends, colleagues, and maybe total strangers to vote for your comment, and we will see the top 3 comments will be our winners, and you guys will receive either 30, 45, or 60-minute online live consultation with Michael regarding your e-learning project, any questions related to e-learning, or maybe you just want to chat. All right, so I think at this point we are ready to begin. So Michael, let me please pass the mic over to you.
Very good, thank you, and thanks for that great introduction. So it is exciting that we have reached webinar number 8 of 10, and I am sharing my screen and pulling up full screen, so you should see it. Make sure we can see it, Paulina.
Yes, I'm able
Great.
To see it.
Fantastic. So today we will be talking about a lot of information. We're going to focus on touch-ups, making sure that your content is viable and efficient and hopefully accessible as you develop it. So once again, everyone, thank you for coming and thank you for participating. And for those that have participated week by week live or even seen the recordings, welcome back and thank you for participating. A little obligatory information about me. My name is Michael Shiashi. I am a technologist at Alternative Media. Our website can be seen here at alternativemedia.com, as well as my Twitter handle, mass@edev, or @mass_edev, and so feel free to send us a tweet. I have around 20 years or so in the e-learning industry and information technology, starting in the academic university world and corporate and consultation. So I have a couple of bachelors in film and Native American studies and one in 3D modeling from the MFA from Academy of Art University in San Francisco. So as we jump in today, remember that we want to make sure that we invite all of you to open discussions and dialogue with us. Make sure that we keep things conversational. Please make sure to insert questions, be it technical or discussional or problems or specific solutions you found. Make sure that you ask other people in the chat. Again, you can live tweet at mass_edev or iSpring Pro, but let's keep the conversation going. So let's take a quick look at where we've been last week. So we talked a lot about making sure that our UI and UX was good and what the differences were and why it's important. We wanted to make sure that we had user interface and user experience that was designed well and made sense. As a sort of joke here that you can see, it may be a very no-brainer straight path for the user, but maybe we designed it in a certain way. But when we create good UI and good UX, it increases the credibility of not only our authored content, but of what we're presenting as well, and the idea We talked a lot about best UX practices and UI. There's a lot of good websites we shared last week, so make sure you check it out. We focused a little bit on font and typography. What are some good tips and what are some good ways to present it. Also how to present it within PowerPoint and iSpring content using templates where available. A lot of these are built in. They look great, and so I suggest using them. And then making sure the player itself, through a lot of experimentation and looking to see what the layout is and what's needed to make sure the user experience is customized not only for your user or your learner, but also for the content itself. So we've covered a lot of content over this webinar series. So everything starting from planning out your project to talking about what your role and what your SMEs and stakeholders' roles are. We look at authoring for both on-screen and narration. We also looked at video editing and audio recording and editing of both of those media inside iSpring. We wanted to make sure that we looked at ways to enhance and made the content more engaging. And ways to look at making it more interactive and immersive, sometimes with branching scenarios, sometimes with quizzes. Last week we looked at best UI and UX. Today we'll look at ways that we can touch up, use everything we've done so far and put a real good polish on what we've done. In the coming weeks we'll share ways to how to publish, and then finally we'll look at sort of the best of. A lot of good examples to show you what to consider as you're developing your own content. So as mentioned today, we are going to look over accessibility, what that means, the different conformance standards, looking at ways of making sure your PowerPoint itself is accessible, how to check accessibility, some online tools and resources, how to make sure that the on-screen text is accessible, looking at ways to make sure that the video meets accessibility standards, and also looking at, with that video, making sure it's ready for mobile, as well as other content in your media. So let's jump right in. We'll talk about accessibility, and you'll see me throw up a term on the screen, A11Y, which is sometimes a conversational way to abbreviated talk about accessibility, or at least mention it by term. I believe, from what I understand, it's an A followed by 11 letters and the letter Y. So it's just shorthand term for accessibility. So if you see that out there in tweets or in discussions, it's really a discussion about how we make the content itself accessible for all our learners, including those that are sight challenged or hearing challenged or whatever it is. So jumping right in, when we talk about accessibility, there's a couple of standards to consider. There's what probably most everyone has heard of, which is Section 508, and there's also WCAG 2.0. And so that's WCAG, WCAG 2.0. So there's a lot of understanding, there's a lot that needs to be understood. Most of us in the US that have had governmental clients or US government contracts have been held to the Section 508 standard for a number of years, so that you probably are aware, at least heard the term. And those worldwide or more globally are maybe more attuned to the WCAG 2.0. So in order to understand both in the changes, recently Section 508 here in the US has been upgraded, so to speak, to the WCAG level 2.0 AA standard. There is a link to my blog where I kind of go through each and explain it. But just know that for a long time, there was a succinct difference between Section 508 and WCAG 2.0. So these are a lot of acronyms, but basically what I want to point out now is that up until a few short months ago, or even till current time, Section 508 wasn't necessarily as stringent or robust as the standards for WCAG 2.0 AA standards. So we'll get into that just a little bit more, but know that when we talk about those now, they should be synonymous as far as standards. So let's just take a look real quickly. So this is a lot of information, but there are a lot of links that I want to share with you, and that Paulina can share with you through the chat or through other means. But as we go through these, there are 3 levels of the WCAG standard, and this comes from us from the W3C Accessibility Initiative. So this is a global organization that has met, and these standards have been out for a long time, level A, AA, and AAA. So we usually target AA standard, which is the baseline to make sure that the content is accessible. When we do so, we're making sure that the content is perceivable, it's operable, it's understandable. And there's a link on how to actually meet this level of WCAG 2.0. But basically, we're making sure that whatever we provide in our content, that our learners is presented in a ways they can actually perceive or they can consume in some way. And as we do so, we want to make sure, like we talked about last week with UX and UI, that whatever we provide to them in this information, the navigation and the interface itself has to be one that they can operate. There's special, not special, but there are considerations for people that operate via screen reader, for instance. They need to be able to tab through the information. They need to be able to activate things with a keyboard enter or space bar. And so a lot of that's taken care of if you published HTML5 already, because the listener that listens for a mouse click also works for these. But above all, we need to make sure that the information and content we provide is understandable, it's comprehensible, or comprehended, and so that everything we do has to be understood by our learner. That's a lot of information, but as you take a look at the links, you'll see. So let's throw a quick poll question in. So today I want to ask, what are your accessibility requirements? Paulina, if we could go ahead and put that poll question up while I read through it. So, what are your accessibility requirements? Is it Section 508? Is it WCAG 2.0 AA? Is it something else? Do you have a name for this standard based on internal policies, or is this all new information to you and you're not quite sure what your organization's needs are? So polls are open. Go ahead and answer that on the right-hand side. It looks like we've got several people coming in. A lot of us are currently unaware of what level of accessibility requirement our content has, and that's fine, and I think that happens a lot. Let's give just a few more moments, Paulina, and then we'll go ahead and close this. So.
Yes, and here is a comment. Don't know. We fall under OSHA and MSHA.
So it sounds like that's OSHA. And so that would be a U.S. federal government installation. So strictly speaking, I would bet if you're underneath those umbrellas that you probably do follow what was the former version of Section 508, not the current, because many times that was the baseline. And I won't disparage between the two. Let's go ahead and close the polls. So thank you. And so I really am not here to disparage between Section 508 and WCAG 2.0, only to bring up that now what I would say the current standard is WCAG 2.0 AA. So make sure you check out the links and make sure that you look at those, specifically because the conformance or the ability to say I have met these standards for Section 508s have changed a little bit. So check those out. So let's go back into our slides. So there are ways to sort of cover accessibility. Of course, you can go through that checklist I provided earlier about how to meet, and that's from a separate, from the W3C organization. But Microsoft itself offers ways to make just your PowerPoint itself accessible, so that when you share it between your stakeholders or your SME or your learners, not just the PowerPoint can be made accessible. So some things they suggest is making sure you use alt text. Make sure that you adjust the tabbing or screen reading order in the selection pane. And so let's take a quick look at that. And so I'll just point that out. So I'll exit out on my slideshow and click onto this image. So this would be where we add tags and other things. I'm not going to go through each one of these. However, I did want you to see in this particular one where we look at the requirements here, we go to this open menu to format the shape, or in this case an image. We go over to the picture corrections. The tab should be listed here. We could also right click and edit alt text here. That's probably an easier way to do it. In this case, know that we would add alternate text here that describes what we're seeing. In this case, if it were vital or integral or supported what I have on screen, here's where I would say icon of Microsoft PowerPoint. And so that would help a screen reader understand what the image is looking at. So that's alt text. And then, of course, in the same select, and so going through each of our objects, if we double click it, we get our formatting section. In the selection pane, it gives us a the tabbing order or what goes on here of everything on screen, so you can go through these and adjust them. Again, the link is included below here, so you can go to this website and see. So I'll jump back into my slides. Making sure that you use built-in layouts, and that, again, going back to my slides, is here on the home slide, making sure that when possible you use either the built-in or go in and assign various ones to make sure that this has a header point and this has a body text. And again, this is for PowerPoint only, but it can help later in development. Making sure that links have meaningful text, meaning that it doesn't just say click here, but that it says click the link for google.com or for Google, and that says, you know, it actually tells you where you're going, but the link may have, you know, the HTTP address. Make sure that you use color in ways that convey meaning, and also, as we'll see later, are, you know, color contrast. And again, that's the next point. Make sure that your text in color. We'll look at ways to test whether your color has contrasted and what that means for accessibility here in a moment. But make sure that each slide in your PowerPoint has unique titles. Make sure that if you do use tables, and tables are a special consideration we won't go in today, but if you do use them in PowerPoint, make sure you build them in PowerPoint, not just copy and paste from somewhere else, say like Excel. And make sure you use large font when possible, 18 plus. And again, we talked about various type fonts last week and what the suggestions were. Here's what Microsoft suggests to make sure it's accessible, of course. And as we'll talk about later, make sure that your videos have closed captions, subtitles, description, whatever it is, in order to make sure that it has the textual information to go along with it. So there's ways that Microsoft also provides to check your accessibility. They have what is called the accessibility checker. There's a link here on how to get to that. It's built into PowerPoint. It's one way to do it. There are also several other external tools that you can use. I've created a blog entry that reviews some of these. The link is included here at edeveloperstuff.blogspot.com. There are three that stand out to me. One called A Checker, for A is for accessibility. Another is the functional accessibility evaluator, and then one we'll talk about here in a moment is the color contrast. Between A Checker and the FAE, the functional accessibility evaluator, and again, these are very robust tools that will go and look at every single succinct item within that large list of WCAG 2.0. So it may seem daunting at first, but as you begin digging into these reports and seeing what passes, fails, or needs manual human checking, you'll see that there's a lot of great results. Your content will get better. You will see how to develop it. They provide resources. So some of these, if you'll see on my tool review on the blog, some are built in for Chrome, some are built in for Mozilla Firefox, so check that out when you get a moment. Again, these may go beyond your particular skill set, but what it will give you is a baseline starting point to see what a lot of developers look at under the hood for HTML5 and other content solutions. So it's a good way to start and see what it's out there. So as we talk about accessible text, on-screen text, we need to make sure that we look at the WCAG 2.0 AA contrast ratio, the color contrast ratio. And without getting into specifics, so it has to have a ratio of 4.5 to 1 for normal text. And again, normal text, as you see below, would be 14 point, let's talk about large text. So, and then 3.1 ratio for large text. And that's the size, or I'm sorry, that's the color ratio. And again, large text is anything 14 point that's bold or above or bigger than 18 point. So let's do this. Let's take a quick look. I haven't shown you a lot of websites. I do want to take a moment and show you this one. This is an important one as you look at how to make sure that the colors you use on foreground and background are accessible. And this is the accessibility checker, contrast checker from WebAIM. They're the same people that you saw some of the links earlier about how to actually create or how to pass the level 2.0. And so you go in and you find the hex code for the colors you're using. And for those unfamiliar, the hex code is this this number or symbols preceded by a hash text. So you'll have to either go in or use its own color checker to add them, or you can find ways to grab the color of yours. Remember, inside PowerPoint, we have the ability to look and see what color our text is, either by double-clicking it are going here. And again, the same thing for if it was a shape or something else, it may have a background. But going back to the web place, here you can add your information about what you're seeing. I'll provide two colors that are pretty close together here so we get kind of an idea. They're not that close together, but they're pretty dark. This one won't take that one for some reason. Oh, it's because I've got it set all the way up to white. Sorry, here we go. Okay, so this one does pass because the green is so light, but if we made it darker, you see as we go lighter and darker, the pass and fail light up or illuminate green when they or go back to regular for fail. And it also gives us whatever that contrast ratio is for the colors. Now again, that's the ratio between the foreground color, in this case the text, and the background color. So those of you that have used shapes or background color on your either slides or text boxes are familiar with this. As we slide this color up for the foreground color, notice that we now pass. We have a great contrast ratio greater than 4.5 to 1. While that seems rather technical, notice that what happens here in our preview box. And again, these are just two colors I picked out just randomly, but you have specific colors you no doubt use inside your PowerPoint. See how visible it becomes on screen. And so that's what we want to make sure that part of the accessibility is to make sure that it's accessible and it's viewable, it's consumable on screen. And so this helps do that. Again, a lot of information. The contrast ratio may seem new to you, but it makes sense when you get right into it. They give us the pass or fail for normal text. And again, here we're looking at WCAG 2.0 AA. AAA is a little more stringent, but here we're looking at AA. This one would be fine as is, or you could play with the slider or get actual colors from inside your PowerPoint. So let's take a moment, and here in a minute we'll talk about how to do a video and make it more accessible inside PowerPoint and using iSpring to do so. But before we do that, Polina, let's do our second poll question. So speaking of videos, are videos in your e-learning content currently accessible? And so this is just a simple sort of thought-provoking question, yes, no, or don't know. And let's click over to the poll area. So a lot of us so far don't know, and that's not surprising, and that's not anything to be ashamed of. So again, we're all here to learn and hopefully develop and make great content with each other. And so it's great to come to these webinars or other informational sessions and understand we don't know what we don't know until we find out we don't know it. So it's always good that we find these out. So it looks like many of us actually are aware of, at least a quarter of us are aware of that our videos need to be made accessible and such. So
let's see the results.
Okay, so we have 27% yes, 14% no, and about 60% says I don't know. So that's what we have here.
And I also wanted to mention that Andrea shared a resource for those that maybe want to directly sample colors without having to drill into hex codes and then input them via web AIM. So I'm sharing this link through the chat, and I've been also sharing all the links from Michael through the chat, so you guys welcome to take a look at them.
That's very cool. Thank you very much. So there's a lot of great tools out there, and a nice little easy tool, and I'm not sure which tool that she suggested, but I use Pixie sometimes, P-I-X-I-E, and it's a tiny little exe file that runs for Windows, and it allows you to hover over a certain area and copy and paste the hex code just by hitting Control-Alt-C. And so that's a nice little tool to have sometimes. So
and here is,
I don't have the...
Michael, a quick question from Becky. So accessible means presentable, usable, and understandable. Is that correct?
In simple terms, that's the three major sections that the WCAG 2.0 AA standard looks at. And so using those three large terms, there's a lot of subsets about what that means. And quickly going back to this first or second slide here, you'll see it here on the main WebAIM slide here about what it is and understanding it. And so here on how to meet and what that means on this little screenshot of that, how to meet WCAG 2.0, you see in the perceivable section for AA standard, there's a lot and that includes audio, video, colors, all this stuff. So that's basically what it means. You're correct, but those are just sort of overarching categories to look at. But everything we get to are basically those three things. So it's a good question. Thank you.
Thank you.
So let's talk about, so in general terms, many of you are aware that your videos need to have some level of accessibility. And so that would be captions, subtitles, descriptions. There's a lot of information, as I just showed you, on how to meet WCAG 2.0 there that goes in through each of it. So basically, we need to provide an audio description for all pre-recorded video. There's information about how to handle live webinars like what we're doing today and other things, but for the most part, a lot of us will be doing pre-recorded information that's put into our content to consume later. So the baseline point is that we need captions, closed captions they're called in some cases. You can read through the different information about what the difference between closed caption and descriptions are. Today we'll focus on closed caption. Basically the difference is if anything on screen needs to be described. Say that you have a person or a human in your video that has something in their hand and it's important to the actual concept that's being presented, that needs to be included in your captions or descriptions. So. But today we'll talk about closed captions. So what I'll do here in a moment is give a demo of sort of one way to make sure that captions are accessible in iSpring. So there's a lot of ways to skin this cat, those poor cats, but there's a lot of ways to do this. So today I'll be looking at how to do it with HTML5. Now HTML5, of course, we'll have to bring in a web object using iSpring. And to do so, I'll make sure that I have an HTML5 file that includes the video tag for HTML5. It includes a source for that video, and as well it has a track. Now the track is important because it handles the closed captions. So I'll put this all in a folder here in a moment, and I'll show you that includes the video, but it also includes the web VTT file, or the .vtt file, which is web video text track format. So basically that just means that it's a text-only file that has times. This is where you would put the actual closed captioning text that comes up on screen. I've included some links here. There's a lot of great resources on how to do this. But just to cut to the chase, let me go in here. So to give you a preview, first let's go ahead and open up a new PowerPoint slide. Okay, and before I get started, I'll just save this into the folder I want. We'll save it into this week's webinar folder. I will just leave it presentation 1 for lack of a better term. You can name it whatever you need. And so I will change the layout to blank and go over to iSpring and insert a web object. So as I do, there's a lot of things that come up, but let me go back and show you in my web structure here. Inside this week, I have created a folder that has all the information I need. It includes, as I said, the video. It includes the VTT file and so it has the HTML and the video itself. So looking at each one, so those that have not seen a VTT file, and it may be a little small on the screen, this is a VTT file. And I've included links on where to go. You can use online wizards to create this, or you can go in and do this by hand. Notice that each entry starts with a number and it fires off at a certain timeline and on the video, and it goes into another timeline. So this is where this starts. This is an example I found online. You can find it's a generic one that I found so that we got the formatting straight. And then as far as an HTML5 video, now again, today's not about HTML5, but just to give you a snippet of what I'm doing, this is a simple HTML5 file that includes the video itself using the HTML5 video tag. It includes where the video itself is, which is locally in our folder that we created, and it includes a track tag that tells the HTML5 video player to go out and get the VTT file here. And then, of course, if the whatever browser we're using doesn't support, the HTML5 video, we just have a fallback here that says, hey, it doesn't support it. So, but hopefully it does in most cases, and most do. But that gives you an idea of what the subfolder has. So when we go in, we'll go into iSpring. We'll insert a web object on this slide. We will use the pull-down menu to say local path. We will browse to our specific file, which is here. I have to go to it. Hold on. Okay, so here's our, we'll select our HTML file. We'll also say, by the way, go ahead and get the rest of the files in this special folder I've created. We'll display this on the slide, and it should go full screen. We'll say OK. It'll insert the web object, and then we'll go ahead and publish and preview so that you have an idea of what's going on. Now, as I publish this, I'll say a few things. So when you're doing local testing, and I'll leave this named presentation 1, and let me get back and just do it for web and HTML5 only, and we'll leave everything else as default. I won't mess with the player at this point. We'll make sure it's in week 8. It'll be called presentation 1, and we'll publish. So that's a lot to go through. However, what I wanted to show you is how easy it is to add that web object, which includes the file, the VTT file, and the video itself. So as we preview this, as the preview comes up, what we want to do is make sure that we view it in probably Firefox or Internet Explorer. Notice that when we preview it here in our video or in our preview window, that the closed caption button comes up. Let me go ahead and hit play, and I'll make sure I click on closed captions. May need to click it again. I think it was already on. There we go. So see that words come now on screen with the video. And again, these words are just an example. They have nothing to do with this video, but this would be normally if someone were speaking or if there was information on screen, you would put that information here in the VTT file. It comes up. So it does show up here in our preview, but notice what happens. Let's also look in Firefox first, and then we'll take a look at Chrome. So Firefox also, each browser has its own way of handling HTML5 video. And each one has its own way of handling also the VTT file or the caption file. So as we open up the Firefox version of it, you'll notice that it should play just fine. We'll go in, it'll load it up. And on screen, we also have now a different looking closed caption button because again, every browser has its own way of doing things. I'll go ahead and make sure I turn that on. Okay, now there is now there's text on screen and such. Let's go back and we'll take a look now at how Chrome experiences that. So we'll view in browser using our preview window, and we'll say Google Chrome. We'll go in, it will load it up. It also looks different again, and I've got a little bit of jitter because of how I've created the video. I've made it 100%, so that was my fault. But notice down here there's no, and I know it's hard to see with it jittering, but there's no closed caption button. So if we look in, and again, this is maybe something that you wouldn't normally do, but if we look at the developer tools of why that is, we've got an error that's firing off saying, hey, by the way, this has a cross origin or a CORS error. And that's just because we're viewing it locally, meaning I'm just viewing this on my machine itself rather than on a web server or a LMS server. And so to protect us, the Google Chrome doesn't allow that. Now you can turn it off, you can force it to allow it, but in general you don't want to do that. It's just a security measure. But I did want to bring that to your attention that that does happen in Chrome. So if you are testing this locally, if you are making sure this works for your pipeline or your process, make sure that you test say in Firefox or Microsoft Edge or Internet Explorer. So again, I'll go ahead and get out and save, but that is one way to make sure that the videos inside iSpring have the closed captions or descriptions available using the HTML5 video player. So let's get back in. Whoops. And again, I've included several links for you here. One has the code for HTML5 video, including how to use the track tab, the track section, and also a nice little tool from Microsoft on how to create the VTT file. So it allows you to import the video and pause it and put in the text that's needed, and it spits out the VTT file that I showed you here. So it'll look much like this when you're done. So again, that's a lot of information to cover, and feel free to ask questions as we go through in the chat. As you create video, and this is a throwback to week 4, remember when I talked about anytime you add video or audio or any media, there are different considerations for different mobile devices. The iOS functions slightly differently than an Android or a Windows phone. So make sure you test on each of these as you publish these out, see what happens, and understand what your learners are going to experience. So in some cases, there's no auto start of video, even if you said play on slide, enter. So make sure that you test, and test again to see and make sure that users and learners are able to consume and view the video that you needed. So let's have our last poll question. So Paulina, if you could open up the polls on this one while I read it. So do your learners consume the e-learning content you create by mobile? And so I only ask that to, sort of provoke some thought. Yes, some, yes, a lot, no, or I don't know. So it looks like several of you, looks like we were almost split there for a second. So most of you say yes, your learners use some level of device interaction. And so that's good. Some of you don't know, of course, and so some say you have a lot of users. So for the most part, it looks like primarily it's either yes, a little, or some, or no. Okay, and let's go ahead and close that up. So from that, I just wanted to have that thought in your head. So when we're adding any of these items, you want to make sure that you're testing, and so understanding what your learner is experiencing. So as you consider those, make sure that we think about things like how big is the content you're providing, what are the links and buttons that you're using, or the clickable area, or in this case, the selectable area. And as I mentioned, the video considerations, making sure that they play on each. So there's ways to make sure that your file size in iSpring is mitigated. And again, this is in the publish settings. You can look in the compression tab once you publish, and you can there's several presets available, and you can also adjust these for images and audio and video compression to help mitigate and have that balance between file size and quality. And so the only way to know this for certain is to test each and every one of those. So once we get to this point, we want to make sure that we understand that we've done a lot to make our content great for our learners. We also want to make sure that as we look at ways to not only make it accessible and consumable and perceivable, that we make sure that it's not going to be something that blows up their device, or that just has so much data they'll never be able to download it, and it frustrates. We don't want to increase the frustration of our learner. Again, the only way to do that is to test. Now, many of you may be on a closed internet system. Maybe you do compliance training that is only occurs on a closed network where everybody has the capability at work only. That's great. But again, test and make sure that things are loading quickly and efficiently. And again, the only way to do that is get into the publish settings and look at the compression and test each one. Now, we'll cover a lot of the publish settings next week. We'll go through each tab of the publish settings, as well as different ways to publish in week 9 next week. But today I just wanted you to focus on understand that there's ways you can compress the information to help mitigate that file size. And as many of you know, depending on what LMS you may be using, you may have that cap of 100 megabytes. You may have a huge e-learning course that you've created, that you've got videos and it's interactive and such, but guess what? When you upload it to whatever LMS, there may be a file size limit. So this compression is where you would hopefully mitigate some of that, or make decisions about what needed to be dialed down a little bit. So in the same vein of mobile, I wanted to remind us all that as we make items clickable, or things that say click here to select this item to reveal, or whatever it is, that we need to make sure it's big enough for our learners to select by finger if need be. So I bring that up because that's much of what we can do, is making sure that we preview in the publish setting and test it on different devices once we do publish. So make sure that we're not using something that's rollover only to convey information. Again, because if a learner is on a mobile device, they won't have the rollover for any reason, because there's no rollover. It's either touch or not. So those are just general considerations. I included the link that I brought from last week from the iOS, the people at developer at apple.com. So take a look at that. There's a lot of good, just sort of high level information, or you can dig deeper if you want. But just some tips to make sure that whatever you're doing can actually be engaged or selected by our learner on screen. So we're going to sum up a little bit and take a look at what we talked about today. We looked at a lot of information. We dug in a little bit to accessibility, the differences between the U.S. federal government's 508 and how it's changed and is now more or less the same level as WCAG 2.0 AA. We also talked about ways of making your PowerPoint itself accessible. And I provided you the link from Microsoft of all the things you can do to make sure the actual PowerPoint itself, whether we use iSpring or not, is accessible. And then we looked at ways at checking that accessibility, specifically from a web or HTML5 standpoint, whether it's using Microsoft's checker or some external tools that we've done. I provided some different blog entries for you to look at where I review some tools. We looked at what the WCAG 2.0 conformance requirement is for text contrast color ratio. We took a look at the WebAIM site to show you what that is and how to use it. We had great input for one of our participants today on some ways to get that hex code color information. We also took a look at how one way to make sure that your videos are accessible and have captions inside the iSpring player. And then we talked finally about ways to make sure that mobile information or our mobile learners receive that same information, including making sure the media is good and compressed to a level that they can consume, making sure that the videos are tested and we know how they function in each device, as well as making sure whatever selectable objects on screen are big enough to actually click or press. So that's a lot of information, everyone. So I appreciate you, sort of muddling through. Let's open it up for questions if possible. I'd really like to hear your side of things rather than just me.
Thank you very much, Michael. And Alex has already taken care of some of the questions coming in during your presentation in the chat. And while other questions may be coming, I would like to remind that next week we are going to have a webinar that's going to be dedicated to the sharing content options. So Michael will go over publishing your content, sharing content in iSpring Cloud, and leveraging iSpring Learn LMS as well, like he mentioned at the end of his talk. And also, I would like to say that we will be sharing the recording of this webinar and also all the links that were covered during Michael's presentation as well. And I want to say and maybe share just one more time that Michael's presentation is already available. So I am sharing the link to it right now in the chat box. So you guys should be seeing it just now. All right, so it looks like we have some more questions. So let's start with the first one from Rachel. I missed some of the webinar regarding the video. When recording video on iSpring, are you able to add closed caption text for people to be able to read the voiceover that's occurring during the video within the video feature?
So I may need to rely on the technical expert here, but I think right now in iSpring 8, that's not, if we capture it using iSpring 8, it won't, the closed captions will not automatically show. Is that correct?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, so in that case, we certainly could capture those with iSpring, capture those videos, and then make sure we export those to a file and make sure we have an HTML5 file that is the container or wrapper, and then import that. Is that one way to address that?
I believe that's the best way to add closed captioning.
Yep. So at least in today's discussion, that's what we're going to suggest. So in that respect, certainly capture, certainly edit using iSpring, whether it's audio or video, but then make sure that we export that and save that as a file so that we can later bring that into a specific slide. And again, that's to make sure that it's WCAG 2.0 AA compliant for the video portion of it. The rest may be just fine as is. Again, videos are kind of a special creature because they, at least in this case, we're using the HTML5. We're leveraging that technology to handle it. So.
Thank you very much. And we have a very nice comment from Darren. One thing that helps reduce file size besides compression before publishing is converting pictures used in PowerPoint to PNG format.
Absolutely, that's a great, and so I jokingly refer to that as webifying. For those of you that have used Photoshop, know that we optimize images, so that's a great way to do it. I know there's also a native way to do it inside of PowerPoint as well, but I didn't want to get into that today simply because you know, you can do it all at the end using iSpring. But I think that's a great point. So anytime we use a standard for images, make sure you know it's PNG, especially if it has any transparency or JPEG, so that reduces the file size. So.
Thank you. And another question is from Jamie. How will we add descriptions on images that we add to our presentations for accessibility?
Okay, so let's take a quick look at an image. So I did go over that, but it was really quick. And so to ensure that they're accessible, first, the main point, whether you're a developer, a designer, or instructional person, is does this particular image add needed value to the page? So it may add visual value. It may help punch home some information, but is that information something that needs to be read by a screen reader, perhaps, in order to ensure that whatever information that you have on screen? So in most cases, we would right-click the text and we would say Edit Alt Text, and we would go in here, and this is where we would put our description, and this would be read by a screen reader, or in many cases, if you hover over it with your mouse, again, don't want to get into hover, but it would show up on that way as well, and this is where we would add it. You see, it doesn't necessarily have to be expansive. It can be something simple. There's an example here. It says close-up of a card, although that's not what this is. If it were some sort of card, that would be acceptable as far as a acceptable alt text description. So in many cases, we may have very robust images that really have a lot of information. There's a limit to that, how much alt text you can put in. Be succinct, use words sparingly, but make sure that you adequately describe it. But if you have those parts that are way more robust that can be included in alt text, look up the WCAG 2.0 AA standards and see what they suggest, because they do have a lot of information on how to address that.
Thank you very much. And another question is from Andrea. Thank you so much for all this information. With regards to hit states, button sizes, do you have a way that you go about sizing this, considering there are going to be size differences between the three displays: desktop, tablet, mobile phone? Do you just create it making sure it's the minimum, and then if it scales up, it's not a problem? It's under my impression iSpring doesn't substitute buttons, for example, if they are served up on different sizes like you do with responsive web pages.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I don't have a baseline minimum. And again, what I would do is go and use the Apple developer area. So here it says at least 44 points by 44 points, which is a square. So the points are sort of specific in our level of, so we won't deal with points necessarily inside. But we can use this guide as a visual guide. Note that the finger only covers about half. So that would be about 44 by 44, what they're showing in there. And so using that as a reference, just generally speaking, especially when you begin putting this on a preview, you would publish it out and share it to your phone or share the link with someone, and you would make sure that you can press each and every one. And so there's no way to do that other than just testing. Now, like I said, I sort of guesstimated the size there when we were talking about it, but there's no set size here. I would say that you need to investigate and test on what would works and what doesn't. So I would suggest again, maybe thinking about the pixel level, so nothing short of, say, 40 by 40. And again, I know this is points, but some of that has to do with just testing. So I don't have a standard that you could use each and every time on all the slides that would work across all devices. I know that everything in iSpring that you publish out looks great on no matter what device, but we need to make sure that it's something that is easily pressable and activated. So there's no way to do it except just literally get the device and put it on and take a look. So.
Thank you very much for covering that. And we have a next question from Becky. Can you explain what you mean by screen reader? What is the purpose of it?
That's a great question. I probably should have covered it. So generally speaking, a screen reader is something that allows the learner to go in and experience, especially ones that are sight challenged, to see and experience the entire page. The most popular one is a paid for experience. It's called from Freedom Scientific, called JAWS. And basically what happens is using a computer voice, and those of you that have heard Siri or other type of computer voices know what I mean. It reads aloud what is on screen. If I had it activated in this particular one, it would say Chrome window, and it would read me the web address, and would go through and read each element of this page, starting top to bottom, going left to right, all the way down. Different languages can be set. There are different ways to activate it. When you tab through a web page, see how it highlights here, it would read whatever you're tabbing on and tell you if it was an input value. For instance, it would say, search box input, a search term here. It would say button search here, because it's describing what is on screen. So basically a screen reader, and there's free versions as well. I think one is called, I think it's NVDA or NVDA, I'm not sure. Yeah, there it is. And so I'm just sharing my screen here, but this is also a free open source one available as well, which they do take donations for. But it is a screen reader as well. But basically it allows sight challenged or visually challenged individuals to experience the content or webpage or whatever it is and have it read to them in an audible way. And so it literally does that. It reads the screen and it interacts with more than just, say, e-learning content or web content. It can interact with your computer's apps and such. So that's why we make sure that we have alt text to describe what's on the screen image-wise. We make sure that we have taken a look at the selection order and the selection pane so that it's tabbed top to bottom, left to right. And so that's what I mean by screen reader. And I think that's a fantastic question. I appreciate you bringing that to my attention. So.
Thanks for your answer, Michael. And I've also shared Jane Bozard Designing for Accessibility post on our blog, so you are more than welcome to read it and maybe find something new about accessibility. And Andrea says, going back to her question, okay, I thought it was going to be a matter of just publishing / testing it, but wanted to make sure there wasn't a shorter process I wasn't aware of. That's what I have been doing. Great. Thank you, Michael.
Fantastic. Yeah, that's always it, right? It's develop, publish, test, correct, and make edits, develop, publish, test again. So.
Right. And then Becky says, got it. Thanks.
Fantastic.
All right, so at this point, looks like we have no other questions coming regarding this topic, but I should admit that this was a lot of information. So, I mean, something to think about, something to consider, and maybe something to apply for the next courses. And all right, so just saying one more time that we will be sharing all the resources from this webinar sometime tomorrow, and we're having our next webinar next week on Wednesday, and we will see you there, guys. So thank you very much all for coming. Thank you for your questions, and thanks to you, Michael, for covering this topic for us today, and to Alex for taking care of the question during the webinar.
Very cool. Thank you so much.
All right.
Thank you.
I hope you guys have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.